Hey guys, tonight we are dropping straight into the South Pacific, where palm trees lean at ridiculous angles, coconuts fall with lethal timing, and the surf is so good it makes Europeans forget they're supposed to be civilized. But instead of your toes in warm sand, you've got boots that smell like wet socks and gunpowder, because this is Samoa in the late 1880s. Paradise. Yes, but also the scene of a slow-motion slapstick brawl between Germany, the US, Britain, and the Samoans themselves. Imagine three drunk uncles fighting over who gets to sit in the best beach chair, while the actual homeowner, the Samoans, is like, "Bro, this is literally my house." Your chances of survival, slim between tropical disease, random musket fire, and pineapples that double as blunt weapons. You're probably not surviving this. But hey, you made it here, so grab your metaphorical surfboard and your very real bayonet. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop your location and local time in the comments, so we know which time zones are staying up late to hear about white dudes arguing over coconuts. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you notice about Samoa is the fruit. Everywhere. Coconuts falling like bombs, bananas stacked like ammunition, and pineapples so sharp you could probably commit war crimes with one. In fact, rumor has it a German officer once tried to bayonet a pineapple, only to discover that the fruit fought back. He limped for weeks. Not officially recorded in military history, but you can picture it. Meanwhile, the Samoans are like demigods out of a Polynesian epic. Tall, tattooed, and so good at paddling canoes that even British sailors were jealous. Chiefs rule with charisma, songs, and the occasional machete reminder. Their politics are complex bloodlines, rival clans, and alliances that shift like the tide. But into this walks the modern colonial buffet Germany, the United States, and Great Britain, all drooling over Samoa's strategic harbors like kids eyeing the last slice of pizza. Germany is first, big, brash, and aggressive, waving contracts that nobody asked for and planting flags like a toddler, scattering Lego pieces. They back one Samoan king claimant, Thomases, because he promises to sign paperwork that benefits Berlin. The Samoans look at the fine print. Actually, they don't, because who even has time for German fine print in the tropics, and realize it basically says congratulations. You are now slightly German. Pay taxes and coconuts. Meanwhile, across the Pacific, America suddenly notices, wait, there are islands out there. The US had a habit in the 19th century of discovering places everyone else already knew about, then insisting on ownership rights. They arrive with the subtlety of a brass band at a funeral. Guns, ships, Marines sweating in wool uniforms, men who thought they signed up for glory, but actually signed up for jungle rashes and heat stroke. Britain, they're not in a rush. They show up sipping tea on deck, making polite noises about maintaining order. But everyone knows they just want to stop the Germans from hogging the good anchorages. Also, coconuts. Always coconuts. So here's where you come in. You're standing in Apia, the bustling port town, watching this circus. Samoans are trying to keep the peace while these foreigners puff up their chests. The chiefs are like coaches drafting players for a rugby match, except the stakes are sovereignty and occasional cannon fire. One day you swear allegiance to King Malietoa-Lapepa. The next you're being pressured to switch jerseys to Team Thomases. By Friday, some cousin tells you Mataafa is the real deal. It's like being stuck in a fantasy football league run by colonizers. Here's your first historical fact to anchor you. In 1887, the Germans literally landed troops to support Thomases, and then proceeded to burn villages that opposed him. That escalated faster than a karaoke fight at 2 a.m. Weird trivia time. The Samoans had a tradition of using enormous shell trumpets called pu, both for ceremony and to signal war. Picture this. You're crouched in the jungle, sweaty, waiting for orders, and suddenly you hear the honk of a seashell that sounds like a goose being strangled. That's your signal to charge. Romantic, maybe. Terrifying, definitely. And yes, historians still argue whether Germany's obsession with Samoa was strategic genius or just colonial boredom. Was it about trade routes? Was it about prestige? Or was Berlin just jealous that Britain had India and America had, well, most of a continent? And they wanted something to show off at parties. The jury's still out. Back to you. The air smells like smoke from cooking fires and gun oil from freshly unloaded rifles. Kids splash in the shallows as German sailors march in awkward goose step, trying not to trip over driftwood. An American officer yells, "Form up!" but half his Marines are too busy staring at Samoan tattoos like they're in an anthropological museum. A British diplomat mutters something about civilized negotiations while adjusting his monocle and dodging a falling coconut. And you're stuck in the middle, realizing that this is less a war and more a tropical sitcom with live ammunition. You're still in Apia, sweating through a shirt that hasn't been dry since you landed, and the locals are picking sides like it's dodgeball on a muddy playground. Forget ideology, forget nationalism. This is about which cousin insulted which uncle's taro patch and which colonial sugar daddy promises the bigger pile of shiny rifles. Chiefs in Samoa don't just choose a leader, they audition for kingship with a mix of charisma, genealogical legitimacy, and how good their warriors look flexing by the shoreline. You're introduced to two of the big names Malietoa Laupepa and Tupua Tamases Taitamaia. Laupepa has the more established royal pedigree, but his leadership style is basically don't make waves. Tamases, on the other hand, has German backing and therefore guns, booze, and bad advice. And somewhere out in the jungle is Mataafa, the third option, lurking like a guy who waits until everyone's exhausted before stepping into the dance-off. Picture this, a council of chiefs under a breadfruit tree. They've been at it all day, pounding kava, passing betel nuts, and arguing over who deserves the title of Tafaifa, the four-titled king. The mood is a mix of solemn ritual and passive-aggressive roasting. One chief says, Laupepa is legitimate. Another replies, yeah, but Tamases has cannons. A third interrupts, Mataafa looks like he could wrestle a shark. And suddenly you realize this isn't politics, it's improv comedy with machetes. Your verified historical fact, the First Samoan Civil War really did erupt when rival factions tried to install competing kings Malietoa Laupepa versus Tamases, each propped up by foreign powers. Germany threw weight behind Tamases. The Americans and British leaned toward Laupepa, not because they liked him, but because they hated German arrogance more. Trivia time, Samoans loved elaborate tattoos, pia for men, malu for women, which were more than fashion, they were badges of honor. But here's the kicker, German sailors sometimes got drunk and paid Samoan tattooists to ink them, only to tap out halfway through because the process involved hours of sharp bone tools and excruciating pain. Result, dozens of half-finished, lopsided tattoos that sailors had to explain to confused girlfriends back in Hamburg. Now, here's the open-ended historical debate. Was this whole war genuinely about Samoan leadership disputes? Or was it a colonial puppet show where Germany, America, and Britain played risk with real people? Some historians argue that Samoans cleverly used colonial rivalry to leverage power for their own clans. Others argue the Europeans steamrolled local autonomy entirely. The truth, as always, is a cocktail of both, shaken, not stirred. Anyway, you're standing there as two factions of warriors parade by in opposite directions. Lapepa's side marches with spears, feathers, and chants so deep they rattle your ribcage. Tamasese's crew is flashier new German rifles, crisp uniforms that look like stolen laundry, and a brass band attempting O Tannenbaum but sounding more like a drowning walrus. You overhear a villager mutter, "These chiefs think they're kings," but really, they're just coaches with foreign sponsors. And honestly, he's not wrong. One week you fight under the banner of Lapepa. The next, you're told to burn his village because Tamasese bribed your cousin. The entire island is in a state of musical chairs, but with machetes. Suddenly, a skirmish breaks out nearby. Not even a proper battle, just some young warriors from opposite factions yelling insults until one throws a breadfruit. The Germans panic, the Americans cock rifles, and the British sigh loudly like parents on a long car ride. Can we not do this now within minutes? 3 men are down, 2 houses are on fire, and someone's yelling, "That was my pig, you idiot!" Comic relief moment. A German officer tries to calm everyone down by firing his pistol into the air. The bullet promptly hits a coconut, which falls and knocks him unconscious. Samoans laugh so hard they forget to keep fighting. But don't get too comfortable. This is just the opening act, the rehearsal chaos. Chiefs are whispering, alliances are cracking, and somewhere in the distance, Mataafa sharpens his blade. Waiting to be the plot twist candidate, everyone pretends they didn't see coming. You're stuck here, caught between pineapple diplomacy and bayonet reality. Realizing this war is basically a rugby match where the referees carry cannons. The Germans don't just arrive in Samoa, they stomp ashore like they've just been told the island is made entirely of beer and bratwurst. Their ships sail into Apia Harbor with black, white, red flags flapping, sailors standing stiff at attention, and brass instruments blaring a polka no one asked for. The Samoans watch from the beach with that universal look of, "Who invited these guys?" Germany in the 1880s is an empire with an inferiority complex. Britain has India, France has Indochina, the Dutch have the Spice Islands, and Berlin has a map with a lot of empty spots circled and doodles of pineapples in the margins. Samoa is their chance to look important at dinner parties. Chancellor Bismarck himself might never set foot here, but his diplomats will brag, "Ah yes, Samoa, our crown jewel of the coconuts." And so, in 1887, the Germans make their move. They back Tupua Tamasese Tetemea as king. Why? Because Tamasese is willing to sign anything, nod politely, and let German merchants carve up the land for plantations. The Germans are thrilled. They march through villages, burn a few houses for demonstrations of authority, and demand that Samoans address their officers as if they were royalty. Historical fact check. On August 31st, 1887, German forces openly landed and declared Tamasese the true king of Samoa. They brought 700 troops, an absurd show of force on an island that barely had that many chickens. They then built forts and tried to collect taxes in pigs, taro, and coconuts. But let's not skip the comedy, Germans being Germans. They try to run things with clockwork efficiency. Picture an officer with a monocle holding a clipboard, barking, "You there, line up, pay your coconuts in alphabetical order." Meanwhile, Samoans are like, "Alphabetical, we don't even use your alphabet." Bro, chaos ensues. Trivia break German colonists imported beer by the barrel. Convinced they could outdrink the Samoans, they failed spectacularly. Samoans brewed Ava Kava strong enough to make Europeans hallucinate and confess their deepest secrets. One German merchant reportedly admitted mid-bender that he missed his cat back in Bremen. The Samoans were polite enough not to laugh too much. Now, for your historical debate, was Germany's aggression in Samoa about genuine strategy, or was it pure colonial ego? Some scholars argue Germany wanted Samoa as a coaling station for its navy, a vital stop on Pacific routes. Others suggest it was simply about national pride. Berlin needed trophies to wave around in European politics. There's even a fringe theory that German merchants exaggerated Samoa's economic value just to secure contracts and bribes. Back to the beach you're standing in Apia as German troops drill. They goose-step through sand, tripping over driftwood, sweating buckets in wool uniforms. Their commander bellows in German, and the Samoans snicker because he sounds like an angry goose. At one point, a German soldier faints from heat stroke and falls face first into a pig trough. The pig wins the fight. Things escalate when the Germans try to enforce tax collection. Imagine a squad of sailors marching into a village, demanding 3 pigs per household in broken Samoan. Villagers nod politely, then present the skinniest pigs they can find. The Germans don't notice until dinner, when the roast pig is mostly bones and attitude. Then comes the first real clash. Tamasese's men, armed with German rifles, march into a rival village loyal to Malietoa-Lapepa. The Samoans fight back with spears, slings, and sheer fury. The Germans fire cannons from their ships, aiming for precision strikes. Translation, they blow up 2 fishing canoes and a breadfruit grove. A German officer shouts, "Victory!" while the Samoans regroup in the jungle, laughing about how Europeans can't aim. And you're caught in the middle, ducking musket balls, wondering why the Germans act like they own the place. A Samoan warrior slaps your back and says, "Don't worry, they'll leave soon. Foreigners always do." You try to believe him, but you've seen the size of those German ships, and they're not exactly built for quick getaways. The absurdity peaks one evening when a German band decides to hold a cultural concert to impress the locals. They set up trumpets, trombones, and a tuba, blaring Wagner into the humid night. The Samoans respond by drumming, chanting, and dancing so hard the Germans can't even hear their own instruments. Finally, the tuba player gives up, joins the dance, and later deserts entirely to marry a Samoan woman. By now, the Germans think they've secured the island, but you sense the storm clouds forming literal and political. Because if there's one thing worse than German arrogance, it's the arrival of Americans who refuse to be outdone. The Americans make their grand entrance the way they always do, late, loud, and convinced they're the main character. It's 1887 and a U.S. Navy squadron lumbers into Apia Harbor like a drunk uncle arriving at a wedding after the speeches are over, still shouting, wait, don't cut the cake without me." Their ship's sleek by New England standards, but absurdly overdressed for the tropics anchor right beside the Germans. Sailors in stiff blue uniforms pour onto the docks, instantly regretting every square inch of wool they're wearing in 90-degree heat. Half of them are already sunburnt, the other half are drunk, and all of them are convinced they've come to save Samoa. Save it from mostly from Germans being German, apparently. Your verified historical fact, the U.S. didn't back Tamaseses. Instead, they supported Malietoa-Lapepa, who had been exiled briefly by the Germans. The Americans saw him as the legit ruler, or at least the one less likely to sign away every harbor to Berlin, with Britain tagging along. The Americans started showing up with Marines, warships, and diplomatic scowls, determined to play referee while also sneaking in their own claims. Now, America's diplomacy style in Samoa is, let's call it fraternity hazing with cannons. Picture this: a German officer is lecturing Tamaseses about taxes when a U.S. Marine suddenly yells, "This whole island is under our protection. Nobody invited him," but he says it anyway. The Germans bristle, the Samoans blink, and somewhere in London, a British clerk quietly chuckles. This will be hilarious to watch. Trivia break: American sailors brought baseball to Samoa. Yes, while everyone else was arguing over kingship and sovereignty, USO crews set up makeshift diamonds on the beach, teaching Samoans how to pitch and swing. Historians note the game never really caught on, but for a few months, warriors were playing pickup games with spears planted in the outfield as goalposts. Imagine trying to slide into second base while dodging a ceremonial war club. Here's your debate question. Did America actually care about Samoa? Or was it just about flexing against Germany? Some argue the U.S. wanted Samoa purely for its harbor at Pago Pago, a perfect naval coaling station. Others say the U.S. didn't even really want Samoa, they just didn't want Germany to have it. Classic sibling rivalry. I don't want the toy, but you can't have it either. Anyway, back to Apia. Picture the harbor German warships on one side, American warships on the other, both crews glaring at each other like rival gangs at a high school dance. Samoan villagers stroll past, selling coconuts and laughing at the Europeans who are sweating bullets. You watch as two American sailors challenge two Germans to a drinking contest. The result? Everyone passes out, and the Samoans quietly steal their boots. The Americans also start building fortifications, half-finished trenches, sandbag piles, and even a wooden fort that looks like a tree house designed by overgrown children. They name it Fort Apia. The Germans scoff, calling it kindergarten carpentry, but the Samoans appreciate the comedic value. Then, the first serious clash. American-backed Samoans loyal to La Pepa square off against German-backed Tamas's forces. You're there in the crossfire, watching Marines march stiffly while Samoan warriors move like shadows through the jungle. One American officer yells, "Form a line, but half his men are tangled in vines." A Samoan ally shouts, "You're too loud, but it's too late and the Germans fire." The Americans fire back, and a pig runs screaming through the middle of it all. And here's the absurd part after several hours of shooting. Neither side gains ground. The Americans are frustrated. The Germans are smug. The Samoans shrug and go back to drinking kava. At one point, an American Marine asks his commander, "Sir, what exactly are we fighting for?" The commander, sweating and confused, mutters, "Freedom or coconuts. I'll get back to you." Comic relief moment. A group of Marines try to set up camp, but their tents collapse in the rain. By morning, they're sleeping under upside-down rowboats. The Samoans, watching from their huts, comment, "These foreigners are warriors. They can't even fight mosquitoes." The tension is rising, and you can feel it in the air. Germany thinks it's winning. America thinks it's saving the day. The Samoans know it's their land, but the chiefs are stuck between colonial promises and traditional rivalries. And you're stuck too, realizing the Americans are just as clueless as the Germans, only louder and with slightly better hats. The British arrive in Samoa like a guest who rings the doorbell, waits politely, and then slips in carrying a teapot. While the Germans are burning villages and the Americans are shouting about freedom in broken geography. The British walk into Apia Harbor in 1888 with an air of smug restraint. Their ships are clean, their sailors well drilled, and their officers absolutely dripping with condescension. You're standing on the dock when a British captain descends, monocle gleaming, and announces, "We are here to ensure order." He says it with the tone of someone who's about to critique your cutlery. Samoans nod, mostly because they've seen this performance before. Germans stomp, Americans yell, and the British, they sigh theatrically while quietly maneuvering themselves into everyone's business. Verified historical fact, Britain did. In fact, try to act as the balancer between Germany and the United States during the Samoan conflict. They weren't deeply invested in Samoa itself, no plantations, no strong military presence, but they were determined to prevent Germany from gaining too much control. Think of it as keeping score in the Global Empire League table. Trivia nugget: the British had a habit of giving naval ships absurdly pompous names. One frigate patrolling Samoa was HMS Calliope, named after the Greek muse of epic poetry. Imagine steaming into a harbor where Germans have the warship Adler Eagle and Americans have the USS Nipsic. And then there's Calliope, sailing in like it's auditioning for a Shakespearean tragedy. Now, the historical debate: was Britain genuinely interested in Samoan stability? Or were they just there to troll Germany? Some argue that London hoped to use Samoa as a minor naval outpost. Others believe the British simply didn't want to be left out of the Pacific land grab, like a kid pretending to enjoy Monopoly just because the siblings are playing. The truth? Probably both, with a side order of smugness. So here's the scene: German troops are drilling in perfect chaos. Americans are trying to build a fort out of driftwood. And suddenly the British sail in, set up a neat little camp with proper tents, and start serving tea at 4 o'clock sharp. You watch as a British officer offers kava to a Samoan chief, but pours it into fine china instead of a coconut shell. The Samoans politely sip, whispering later that the drink tasted like wet socks. The British diplomatic style is passive-aggressive artistry. When a German officer declares, "Samoa belongs to us," a British envoy calmly replies, "How quaint." When an American insists, "We're here to protect democracy," the Brit raises an eyebrow and says, "From whom the Germans grind their teeth." The Americans throw their hands up. The Samoans just laugh. Because these three foreigners are bickering like divorced parents at a school play. Then comes the comedy of errors. A German patrol tries to march through a British encampment. By accident, a British sergeant blocks them with the politest of insults. "I'm terribly sorry, gentlemen, but this path is reserved for civilized use." The Germans retreat in a huff, muttering curses. That night, someone steals the Germans' beer barrels and leaves behind empty teapots. Nobody ever proves it was the Brits, but, the first joint skirmish you witness is chaos personified. German-backed Tamases warriors clash with American and British-backed La Pepa loyalists near Apia. The Americans blast away with rifles, Germans return fire, and the British The British form a neat line, fire one volley, then complain loudly about the mud ruining their boots. At one point, a British sailor shouts, "This is dreadfully uncivilized," as he ducks behind a pig pen. The pig is braver than him. Comic relief moment during negotiations. A British diplomat tries to impress Samoan chiefs by quoting Shakespeare. He dramatically declares, "To be or not to be?" That is the question the Samoans, puzzled, whisper. Is he asking about kingship again? One responds, "Tell him the answer is definitely not to be." The meeting collapses in laughter. The bigger picture becomes clear to you. Samoa isn't just fighting over kings, it's the unlucky stage for three empires competing to outpreen each other. Germany flexes military might, America flexes volume, and Britain flexes sarcasm. Meanwhile, the Samoans just want to live, fish, and occasionally paddle out to sea without cannonballs flying overhead. You sit by a fire that night, listening to warriors sing deep harmonies while British sailors awkwardly try to join in. Their attempt sounds less like music and more like a herd of geese. But the Samoans clap anyway, mostly out of pity. And you sip kava, staring at the stars, realizing this war isn't just stupid, it's theater, a savage, absurd, colonial theater where everyone forgot the script. It's only a matter of time before diplomacy, the supposed polite part of empire, explodes into the equivalent of a drunken tavern fight. The Samoan chiefs sit cross-legged in their fail, trying to keep a straight face while watching three sets of foreigners bicker like children fighting over crayons. Germany, America, and Britain all claim to respect Samoan sovereignty, which is hilarious because at this exact moment, they're arguing about who gets to pick the king. Picture at a big meeting in Apia. The Germans arrive first, carrying folders of documents and wearing monocles so shiny they double as signaling mirrors. The Americans march in late, boots muddy, uniforms crooked, shouting, "We're here for freedom!" The British glide in, sipping tea, unimpressed, probably humming "God Save the Queen" under their breath. The Samoans are already there, bored, wondering if this is the part where they get free rum again. Your historical fact anchor. In 1887 to 1889, negotiations between these three powers were constant, chaotic, and famously unproductive. Instead of solving Samoa's leadership crisis, they argued endlessly about treaties, land titles, and which chief should be recognized. Spoiler, no one agreed, and the war dragged on. Trivia nugget: one American consul in Samoa, Harold Sewell, was known for shouting his points so loudly that chiefs would leave meetings early just to protect their eardrums. On the flip side, the German consul, Stubel, was nicknamed the Coconut Bureaucrat because he literally tried to catalog Samoan coconuts for taxation. Imagine a grown man with a ledger, scribbling 1, 2, 3. As villagers sneak off with handfuls of coconuts behind his back. And now the big debate. Did these negotiations fail because of cultural misunderstanding, or because colonial powers never actually wanted Samoan independence? Some historians argue the Europeans and Americans genuinely thought they were helping by stabilizing the monarchy. Others claim the whole show was designed to divide and conquer, making Samoa easier to carve up later. Either way, the only thing certain is that Samoans got a front row seat to the worst improv comedy in history. Back to the meeting, you're there, sweating in the humid air as Germans slam tables, Americans shout, and Brits politely cough insults. At one point, the German consul declares Samoa belongs to Thomasese. With German protection, the American roars. Over my dead democracy-loving body, the Brit raises an eyebrow and says, "Gentlemen, please, let's maintain dignity." A coconut falls on his head mid-sentence. The Samoan chiefs finally respond with masterful trolling. They listen to each speech, nod gravely, and then say something like, yes, we will consider it carefully. Then they walk out to paddle canoes, leaving the foreigners arguing alone. It's the political equivalent of ghosting. Eventually, negotiations spill into the streets. You watch a German officer and an American Marine get into a literal fistfight outside a tavern, rolling in the sand while British sailors cheer like it's a cricket match. An umbrella is broken, a saber is unsheathed, and somehow a missionary gets dragged into it, trying to quote the Bible while dodging beer mugs. Comic relief moment during one serious treaty signing attempt. The ink ran out. A Samoan chief casually suggested using squid ink. The Europeans took him seriously, wrestled a squid out of the water, and spent the next hour covered in ink and curses. The treaty never signed. And you're caught in the middle of this absurdity, realizing that diplomacy in Samoa is less about negotiation and more about who can embarrass themselves fastest. By the end of the week, nothing has been solved, everyone hates each other more, and the chiefs are quietly sharpening spears while humming war chants. Because when the diplomats fail, and they always do, the next act is blood and thunder, you sit back, exhausted, realizing that this civil war isn't just Samoans versus Samoans. It's now become a full-blown three-ring circus with bayonets, coconuts, and too much rum. And the curtain hasn't even risen on the storm that's about to wreck everyone. Canoes against cannons. That's the headline. That's the mood. That's the stupid, savage theater you're about to live through. On one side, German warships bristling with Krupp artillery, American gunboats with shiny brass fittings, and British frigates with sailors polishing their boots like it's Sunday. On the other, Samoan warriors in dugout canoes carved from breadfruit trees, spears tipped with bone, and shields made from coconut fiber. It's David versus Goliath, except Goliath keeps tripping over his own cannonballs. Historical fact for your anchor: in 1888 and 1889, Samoan factions launched multiple surprise attacks on German forces. One infamous clash at Vailele Plantation saw Mataafa's warriors ambush German troops, killing several and forcing a retreat. That single event humiliated Germany, proving that dugout canoes and local knowledge could outmaneuver imported rifles and European hubris. Now, picture it. You're paddling through mangroves at dawn. The air is thick with mist and the smell of salt. Your canoe creaks under the weight of warriors, faces painted, muscles tense. A conch shell blows, deep and haunting, and suddenly arrows whistle through the trees. German troops stumble into the jungle, sweating in wool uniforms that soak up water like sponges. They fire blindly, hitting mostly palm trunks. Salmons melt into the undergrowth, strike, then vanish. Trivia time: Samoan canoes weren't just weapons, they were sports cars. Some were fitted with outrigger balances that let them slice through waves faster than European boats. Sailors swore Samoans could paddle circles around steam launches, and one American officer allegedly wrote in his diary, "Our engines smoke, their arms don't. We look like idiots. He wasn't wrong." And here's your open-ended debate. Did the Samoans actually believe they could win against European powers, or were they fighting to bleed them until exhaustion set in? Some scholars say Samoans were realists. They knew the odds but fought anyway for dignity and sovereignty. Others argue they believed in divine backing, that their gods and ancestors would tip the scales. Either way, the resistance was fierce enough to make Berlin, Washington, and London all rethink their plans. Back to the action. You're crouched behind a rock as Samoan warriors hurl stones at German patrols. A cannon booms from a ship offshore, but the ball lands 200 yards short, exploding a poor breadfruit grove. A Samoan warrior yells, "Thanks for the firewood," before charging. German officers scream in frustration. Their troops refuse to leave the plantation walls after repeated ambushes. Comic relief moment. In one battle, a German officer drops his saber while tripping over roots. A Samoan warrior picks it up mid-charge and waves it around, shouting in broken German, "Danke schön." The Germans retreat in panic, convinced reinforcements have arrived, when really it's just one guy with a fancy sword. The Americans, meanwhile, try their hand at jungle warfare and fail spectacularly. Marines stumble into swamps, rifles jam in the rain, and one private panics when he hears a pig grunt. Firing 3 rounds into the mud, the Samoans laugh so hard they forget to chase him. The British, they send small detachments, mostly to observe, which is code for stand at a safe distance and write smug reports about how everyone else is doing it wrong. But the most striking image burned into your brain: Samoan warriors paddling tiny canoes straight toward German gunboats, spears raised, chants echoing, cannon fire splashes around them. But they keep coming. It's not rational. It's not logical. It's absurdly brave. They dart in, torch small landing boats, then vanish back into the lagoon. Europeans gape, mutter about savages, but deep down they're rattled, because bravery like that doesn't fit into their rule book. By the end of the week, plantations burn, patrols retreat, and the jungle hums with victory songs. The Germans lick their wounds, the Americans scratch their heads, and the British quietly sip tea, pretending they planned all this. And you're dripping with sweat, ears still ringing with conch shells, realizing the canoes just embarrassed cannons, and this war is only getting stranger. And then, because the gods of absurdity weren't finished, the sky itself decides to join the war. March 1889, Apia Harbor. The Germans have 3 warships lined up like they're showing off for a naval parade, Adler, Olga, and Eber. The Americans have 3 of their own, Trenton, Vandalia, and Nipsic. Britain contributes just 1, HMS Calliope, probably smirking about quality over quantity. The Samoans, they sit on the shore eating roasted breadfruit, waiting to see which empire drowns first. Historical fact, on March 15th of 1889, a massive cyclone, historians just call it the Apia storm, obliterated both fleets in the harbor. Winds tore anchors free, ships smashed into reefs, and hundreds of sailors died. It was the most destructive storm in Samoa's recorded history up to that point, and it conveniently humbled every foreign power in one go. The day starts calm. The Germans strut on deck, Americans shine their brass, and the British sip tea, all glaring at each other across the harbor. You're thinking, any minute now, someone's going to fire the first shot. But instead of cannons, it's thunder that rolls in. Clouds bruise the horizon, waves swell, and by sunset, the sky is a warlord. Trivia nugget, HMS Calliope is the only major ship that manages to escape the harbor. Its captain, Henry Kane, orders the engines to full steam, dodging wrecks and reefs to reach open sea. Samoans later composed songs about it, calling Calliope the iron canoe that outran the gods. Meanwhile, the American ship Trenton signaled "God bless you" in semaphore as the British vessel steamed past, one of the few moments of genuine kindness in this entire idiotic conflict. And here's your debate question. Was the storm a freak act of nature, or was it the ultimate proof that meddling empires had no business in Samoa? Some Samoans believe their ancestors sent the storm to protect the islands. Others argue it was just meteorology, plain and simple. Historians still argue divine justice or unlucky scheduling. Back to you! The wind screams like an angry choir. Ships drag anchors, smashing into each other. The German gunboat Eber sinks fast, dragged under like a toy. The American Vandalia is rammed against the reef, breaking apart as sailors cling to floating debris. Men are screaming, cannons roll loose across decks, masts snap like matchsticks, and you're clinging to a palm tree on shore, watching this maritime demolition derby unfold in real time. Comic relief moment in the chaos. A German officer tries to give formal orders in perfect parade ground German. His hat blows off mid-sentence, smacks him in the face, and he's last seen clinging to a chicken crate. The chicken survives, he doesn't. The Samoans on shore are divided between pity and glee. Some rush to rescue drowning sailors, paddling out into storm-racked waves. Others mutter that this is what happens when foreigners play tug-of-war with gods. Fires burn along the coastline as wreckage washes ashore planks, barrels, a cannon wheel, and one very confused goat. By dawn, the harbor's a graveyard. The Adler lies capsized in the shallows, half buried in sand. The Trenton is sinking, its crew saved only because the Samoans haul them ashore. Out of the entire showdown, only HMS Calliope sails away intact, its silhouette fading like some smug British ghost. You're left staring at wreckage, soaked and stunned. The empires came to Samoa to flex, and the Pacific Ocean just slapped them all across the face. No treaty, no cannon, no king, just a storm laughing louder than all of them. And the war, oh, it's not over. The survivors will rebuild, the factions will regroup, and the stupidity will march on. But for this one night, nature reminded everyone who really owned the islands, and spoiler, it wasn't Berlin, Washington, or London. The storm has passed, but nothing sobers colonial arrogance like watching your invincible warships snap like kindling in a bathtub. You'd think Germany, America, and Britain might pack up and go home. Nope, they dry their socks, bury their dead, and immediately get back to business, propping up Samoan factions like drunk gamblers chasing losses. Here's your verified historical fact. After the 1889 cyclone, Samoan politics grew even messier. Mataafa Iosefo, remember the patient shark in the background, emerged as a powerful contender. With German forces humiliated and American troops scrambling, Mataafa's faction surged, gaining followers from villages sick of foreign-backed kings. The chiefs who once hedged their bets now leaned his way, because nothing says leadership material like we didn't lose ships in the storm. Now, for the comedy alliances, start flipping faster than pancakes. One week, a chief swears loyalty to Tamases with German backing. The next week, he's clinking kava bowls with Mataafa because the Americans promised a shiny rifle. Britain throws subtle winks across the fire, muttering, "Well, we're just here to supervise," while secretly handing out small arms like party favors. You, poor bystander, are dizzy trying to remember which color armband means ally today. Trivia nugget: Samoan warriors sometimes carried war fans woven from palm leaves not to cool themselves, but to deflect spears or musket balls. Historians argue whether they actually worked or if they were just terrifyingly stylish. Either way, European soldiers reported being unnerved when facing an enemy who casually waved a fan while charging at them. And here's the debate. Were these Samoan alliances genuine partnerships with foreign powers, or were chiefs cynically exploiting colonial rivalry to keep the islands in Samoan hands? Some historians admire Mataafa's cleverness. He played Germany, America, and Britain off each other like a chess master. Others argue the chiefs underestimated just how permanent colonial meddling could become. Back on the ground, you're trudging through muddy trails with Mataafa's men. They chant war songs, spears glinting in the sun. Behind them, a German merchant huffs along, offering crates of ammunition in exchange for plantation security. Down the road, an American officer tries to recruit the same warriors with promises of liberty and canned peaches. The warriors smile, nod, and take both. Congratulations, Samoa has invented multi-level marketing, 19th century edition. Comic relief moment, one chief agrees to host a meeting with all factions. Germans arrive with a brass band, Americans with crates of whiskey, and the British with a treaty draft. The Samoan host says, "Wait here, I'll fetch Mataafa." Hours pass. Finally, someone realizes he slipped out the back, went fishing, and left the foreigners arguing in an empty hut. As weeks pass, you notice the alliances aren't just political, they're personal. Warriors show off German rifles next to American hats. Chiefs wear British medals pinned awkwardly to lavas. Samoan kids run around Apia Harbor shouting Yankee Doodle out of tune. It's a cultural mashup so absurd that one missionary records the island resembles a costume party thrown by God himself. But beneath the laughter is tension. Mataafa's rise means open conflict is coming again. The Germans whisper about revenge. The Americans mutter about justice. The British sip tea, waiting for someone else to start the next disaster. And you're caught in the middle, watching Samoan leaders play the most dangerous game of all, balancing foreign greed against local survival, knowing one wrong alliance could sink everything. You'd think by now the war might start looking like a war uniforms, neat lines, somebody at least knowing which village they're supposed to attack. Nope. What you get is one of history's most ridiculous montages, accidental battles, wrong targets, and foreign gunboats firing at palm trees because the commanders couldn't read a map. Here's your anchor fact. In late 1888 and again in 1891 to 1892, clashes around Apia and nearby villages often turned into disasters of mistaken identity. One of the most infamous skirmishes happened when German Marines raided villages they thought were loyal to Malietoa-Laupepa, only to discover they had torched neutral or even pro-German settlements. By the time the smoke cleared, the Germans had created more enemies than they started with. You're there one morning when it happens. German troops march stiffly into a village, bayonets glinting, shouting in bad Samoan surrender or die. The villagers look confused. Someone whispers, "Wait, aren't we on their side? The Germans burned the place anyway." Hours later, their officer realizes he's literally standing in Thomas's uncle's backyard. Cue one of history's first recorded oops, wrong target. Meanwhile, Americans aren't doing much better. One night, U.S. Marines fire wildly at figures moving in the dark, convinced it's Mataafa's warriors creeping in. At dawn, they discover they've riddled a pig pen. 5 pigs down. The villagers are furious. The Marines try to apologize by buying replacements, but pigs are expensive. So they deliver 3 goats and call it even. The Samoans laugh for weeks about the Battle of the Bacon. Trivia nugget, European gunboats often misfired in tropical humidity. On one occasion, an American cannonball landed squarely in a breadfruit tree, lodging there like an oversized Christmas ornament. The tree didn't fall. The Samoans left it hanging, nicknaming it the Yankee fruit. Now, for the big debate, were these blunders just incompetence or deliberate intimidation? Some historians claim Germans and Americans knew exactly what they were doing, burning villages as a way of breaking morale. Others argue tropical warfare simply confused them dense jungle, shifting alliances, poor maps. Personally, when you watch an officer yell at his compass like it's possessed, you lean toward incompetence. Comic relief moment. During one raid, British sailors land on shore to monitor events. They promptly get lost, wander into the wrong village, and are offered coconuts by confused Samoans. Instead of correcting course, they sit down, sip coconut water, and record in their logs, "Operation successful, natives compliant, technically true, completely useless." But the chaos isn't funny for everyone. Families are displaced, homes destroyed, chiefs humiliated. You pass lines of refugees carrying mats, pigs, and children through muddy trails, glaring at every foreigner they see. One old woman spits in the sand in front of a German patrol. They look away, ashamed. And yet, in the middle of tragedy, absurdity refuses to die. At one point, a German officer storms into a hut demanding tribute. The chief hands him a rooster. The officer, offended, throws it aside only for the rooster to flap onto his head, peck his ear, and chase him screaming down the path. The villagers erupt in laughter, and the story spreads faster than gunfire. By the time you stagger back to Apia, it feels less like a civil war and more like a slapstick road trip where everyone's armed. Germans blame Americans. Americans blame Germans. The British blame uncivilized locals. The Samoans, they're quietly keeping score, shaking their heads at how these so-called superpowers keep missing the point and the target. Missionaries drift into this mess like awkward wedding guests who weren't invited but still insist on giving a speech. They arrive armed not with rifles but with Bibles, hymnals, and the dangerous belief that a little scripture will calm down men with cannons. You're sitting under a breadfruit tree when one missionary confidently tells a Samoan chief, "Peace be upon you," only for the chief to reply, "Yes, but are you bringing rum or rifles priorities, my dude?" Your historical fact anchor missionaries, especially from the London Missionary Society, had been active in Samoa since the early 1800s, converting large portions of the population to Christianity. By the time of the Civil War, most chiefs claimed some Christian affiliation, but missionaries often stoked rivalries by taking sides, either intentionally or through sheer gossip. At least one missionary was accused of favoring Tamasese's faction, sparking bitterness among Laupepa loyalists. Here's the absurd trivia: hymns were so popular in Samoa that warriors sometimes marched into battle singing church songs. Imagine charging a line of German rifles while chanting "Onward." Christian soldiers, half prayer, half psychological warfare, and all weirdly catchy. German troops recorded in diaries that it was deeply unsettling to be shot at by men singing in perfect harmony. The great debate: were missionaries a stabilizing influence in Samoa? Or did they make things worse by meddling? Some argue they spread literacy and helped chiefs navigate treaties. Others point out that missionaries often exaggerated threats to their favored converts, nudging chiefs into conflicts they might otherwise have avoided. It's possible both are true: they brought God, but also gossip. Back to you. You're in a church hut in Apia. Rain drums on the thatch roof while missionaries wring their hands. One insists we must encourage forgiveness. Outside, Samoan warriors sharpen spears and mutter forgiveness after the Germans leave. Another missionary suggests holding joint prayer meetings with rival chiefs. Within minutes, those meetings turn into shouting matches about whose hymn translations are correct. Comic relief moment. A missionary tries to civilize Samoans by introducing European table manners. He demonstrates cutting meat with a fork and knife. The Samoans nod politely, then proceed to cut his chair in half with a machete to show him they also understand tools. They roar with laughter. He sulks. But don't underestimate them. Missionaries wield influence. When rumors swirl that Mataafa might ally with Germans, a preacher whispers that Laupepa is the godly choice. By the next day, whole villages shift allegiance, not because of rifles, but because someone said the devil would prefer the other side. Meanwhile, you notice how Samoans remix Christianity into their own rhythm. Chiefs pray before battle, but also call upon ancestral spirits. Warriors wear crosses on necklaces while chanting traditional war songs. To the Europeans, it looks like contradiction. To the Samoans, it's just insurance. Why not call on every power available when cannonballs are flying? Still, the missionaries can't resist poking the fire. At one peace meeting, a British missionary scolds both sides. Christ teaches forgiveness, not violence. A Samoan warrior shouts back, "Tell that to the Germans with cannons." The meeting ends with a hymn sung so angrily it sounds like a threat. By night, you sit with locals around a fire. They sing hymns, then pivot seamlessly into traditional chants. The blend is eerie, beautiful, and absurdly out of place in a war fueled by foreign greed. You realize missionaries may not stop the fighting, but they're definitely rewriting the soundtrack. The treaty table is back, and this time it's even dumber. Picture 3 foreign diplomats in sweaty suits sitting in Apia with ink-stained fingers, arguing over commas in a document nobody will actually read. Around them, Samoan chiefs pretend to listen, nodding gravely while quietly planning which canoe raid to launch next. Your historical fact anchor. In June 1889, after the cyclone and months of chaos, the three powers signed the Tripartite Agreement of Berlin, which attempted to create a neutral Samoan kingdom under Malietoa Laupepa. On paper, it declared Samoa's independence and promised joint oversight by Germany, the US, and Britain in practice. It was the bureaucratic equivalent of 3 drunks agreeing to share one steering wheel. Trivia nugget: the treaty was translated into English, German, and Samoan, but none of the versions matched perfectly. One clause about land rights in the German draft was entirely missing in the English text, and the Samoan translation used phrases so vague that chiefs joked it could just as well be a recipe for taro stew. Now, for your debate, was the Berlin Treaty a genuine attempt at compromise, or just a diplomatic stall tactic until someone got stronger? Some historians say it was a noble, if clumsy, effort to stabilize Samoa. Others argue it was a farce, designed only to freeze the conflict while keeping Samoans under colonial thumb. Either way, everyone signed, everyone smiled, and everyone immediately ignored it. Back to the scene. You're watching diplomats sweat through their collars, muttering Latin legal phrases like they'll impress anyone. A German insists. Clause 5 ensures our plantation's safety. The American snaps. Not in your dreams. The Brit, sipping tea, suggests. Let's agree to disagree in elegant handwriting. Meanwhile, a Samoan chief raises his hand and says, "What about our pigs?" The question is never answered. Comic relief moment during the signing ceremony. The American consul's pen runs dry. He borrows the German's fountain pen, which explodes ink all over his suit. The Samoans burst out laughing, dubbing him Chief Blackshirt for the rest of the year. On the ground, nothing changes. Germans still back Tamases, Americans still favor La Pepa, and Mataafa lurks in the wings like a shark circling a canoe. The treaty says independence, but foreign gunboats remain in the harbor. Chiefs joke, if this is independence, why do we keep tripping over white men in uniforms? And you, poor soul, you have to sit through endless speeches, pages of fine print about customs duties, arbitration rules, and boundary lines no one could find on a map if their life depended on it. You almost nod off until a Samoan warrior next to you whispers, "Don't worry, we won't follow this nonsense anyway." Comforting. By nightfall, when the treaty is signed, stamped, and filed, diplomats celebrate with rum and awkward toasts. Samoan chiefs slip away to plot the next round of alliances, and you realize the treaty is less a solution and more a placeholder, a joke with signatures waiting for the next storm, battle, or betrayal to rip it apart. By the early 1890s, Germany is exhausted. Not militarily, though the storm and Mataafa's ambushes certainly dented their pride, but spiritually. Colonialism, it turns out, is a lot of paperwork, not much glory, and an endless supply of hangovers. You're in Apia, watching German merchants argue over unpaid debts while officers glare at moldy uniforms and wonder why their empire smells like wet taro. Your anchor fact, after years of fighting and meddling, Germany's enthusiasm for the Samoan project fizzled. The failure to decisively control Samoa, the embarrassment of the cyclone, and the cost of keeping troops overseas all combined to convince Berlin that Samoa was more trouble than it was worth. By the mid-1890s, German focus shifted to colonies in Africa and the Pacific Islands they could actually dominate without Americans breathing down their necks. But until they give up, the Germans do what they do best: overcompensate. They build forts, print decrees, and enforce taxes no one pays. They issue punishments for rebellious villages that simply pack up, move 2 miles inland, and reappear under a different name. One officer complains, "It is like chasing smoke." He's not wrong. Trivia nugget: German plantation owners in Samoa tried to introduce beer gardens, convinced they could replicate Munich in the tropics. The result: mosquito-infested outdoor taverns where coconuts fell into mugs mid-toast. Locals called them drunk groves. And here's the debate. Was Germany's withdrawal a pragmatic move, cutting losses in a doomed colony, or an early sign that Bismarck's empire building was unsustainable? Some historians argue Samoa was just a pawn in global strategy, and losing it didn't matter. Others point out that Samoa revealed Germany's inability to manage colonies without creating resentment, foreshadowing bigger problems in Africa and later world wars. Back to you. You're trudging through yet another German show of strength, watching soldiers march in circles while Samoan kids heckle them. Goose, goose, they shout, mocking the goose step. The Germans scowl but trip anyway, and one even face plants into a pigsty. The pig wins again. Comic relief moment. A German officer demands tribute from a village 10 pigs. The villagers deliver 10 pig statues carved from breadfruit wood, painted pink. By the time he realizes, they're already gone, laughing into the jungle. The truth is obvious. The Germans are tired of fighting chiefs who refuse to stay beaten, tired of ships wrecked by storms, tired of being the punchline at every kava circle. And you can feel it too. The empire that marched in so proudly is now slouching toward the exit, muttering about ungrateful islanders and overdue bills. By 1894, German influence hasn't vanished, but the swagger is gone. They still cling to Tamases and their plantations, but Samoa has bled them of enthusiasm. You sit on the shore, watching a German officer stare out at the horizon like he's questioning all his life choices, and you realize Germany came here for glory and coconuts, and they're leaving with sunburn and a bad reputation. The Americans, meanwhile, are masters of rewriting the script. By the 1890s, the war is sputtering out. Alliances are shifting like waves on the reef. And somehow, the United States decides it has won. Never mind the cyclone that smashed its ships, the botched raids, or the Marines who mistook pigs for Mataafa's men. Washington spins it as a triumph of democracy over German bullying. You're standing in Apia, listening to an American officer boast. We preserved liberty here, while Samoans nearby whisper. Liberty tastes suspiciously like canned peaches. Your anchor fact: after the Berlin Treaty of 1889, the U.S. secured coaling rights at Pago Pago Harbor on Tutuila. This became the real prize, far more valuable than meddling in kingship disputes. By 1899, the U.S. formally annexed Eastern Samoa, today's American Samoa, declaring the mission accomplished. So yes, in the long run, the Americans managed to grab land. But during the actual war, their biggest achievement was surviving tropical weather without melting. Trivia nugget: Marines stationed in Samoa tried to introduce square dances. They hauled out fiddles, taught the steps, and invited Samoan villagers. The result? A hilarious cultural mashup where Samoans blended the moves with traditional slap dancing, creating what one missionary called a spectacle of chaos. Somewhere out there, history's first square dance slap dance hybrid was born. Now for the debate. Did America's involvement in Samoa mark the start of its Pacific Empire, or was it just a fluke? Some historians argue Pago Pago was a stepping stone to Hawaii, the Philippines, and Guam. Others claim it was just opportunistic, bumbling America stumbled into Samoa by accident, then bragged about it forever. Back to the scene. You're watching American sailors paint U.S. Navy Protector of Samoa on a half-sunk supply shed. The irony is too thick to ignore. Their fort at Apia has collapsed twice from termites. Their democratic reforms consist of handing chiefs slightly shinier hats. And yet, in letters home, they write as if George Washington himself wrestled Germany off the islands with bare hands. Comic relief moment. An American consul stages a patriotic ceremony with flags and speeches. Halfway through, a goat escapes from the crowd, tangles itself in the flagpole, and sends the stars and stripes tumbling into a pig trough. The Marines panic, villagers howl with laughter, and the consul insists in his report that it was a solemn and inspiring event. Still, You can't deny America's tenacity. While Germany gets tired and Britain yawns, the U.S. keeps sticking around. They patch up La Pepa's regime. They keep their gunboats visible. And they cling to Pago Pago like it's gold. You overhear a Samoan elder sigh. At least the Americans bring baseball. The Germans only brought taxes. By night, you're sitting on the shoreline. American sailors sing sea shanties out of tune. Chiefs argue quietly about alliances, and the stars blaze overhead. You realize the Americans didn't win the war in Samoa. They just declared themselves the winner and left the rest of the world too tired to argue. The British, true to form, decide to slip away like someone sneaking out of a party before the karaoke starts. They never had the same sweaty enthusiasm as the Germans or the noisy bravado of the Americans. For Britain, Samoa was more about keeping score than actually caring. By the 1890s, with Germany dragging its feet and the U.S. puffing its chest, the British shrug, say, yes, quite, and politely retreat into the background. Your historical anchor fact. After the Tripartite Agreement of 1889, Britain's involvement dwindled. They continued sending ships to observe and occasionally joined negotiations. But by 1899, Britain formally gave up its Samoan claims altogether in exchange for recognition of other territories, notably in Tonga, the Solomon Islands, and West Africa. It was empire horse trading, and Samoa was just a pawn. Trivia nugget, British officers were notorious for holding cricket matches wherever they went. In Samoa, they once staged a game on the beach with Samoans drafted as fielders mid-match. Mataafa's warriors wandered by and mistook the bat for a weapon, nearly starting a skirmish. The game ended abruptly when the ball rolled into the surf and a passing pig ate it. Here's the debate. Was Britain wise to bow out early, focusing resources on colonies that mattered? Or did they miss an opportunity to secure one of the most strategic harbors in the Pacific? Some historians argue it was classic British pragmatism. Samoa wasn't worth the hassle. Others see it as a rare imperial blind spot, letting the U.S. establish a Pacific foothold that would outlast both Britain and Germany. Back to Apia, you're watching the last proper British detachment pack up. Their tents vanish. Their polished boots march back aboard HMS Calliope, yes, still smug about surviving the cyclone. And their diplomats mutter about better investments elsewhere. A Samoan warrior mutters back, "Don't let the coconuts hit you on the way out." Comic relief moment at their farewell dinner, a British officer tries to give a grand speech about honor and civilization. Midway through, his chair snaps, sending him sprawling into the kava bowl. The salmons cheer like it's slapstick theater. The officer bows, soaked, and declares, "Jolly good show." By now, the Civil War fizzles more than it ends. Malietoa La Pepa is king again, on paper, though his authority is shaky. Mataafa remains a looming presence. Tamases fades into German footnotes, and the foreigners, two leave bruised. One stays smug. The Samoans, scarred but not broken, continue singing their war songs, planting their taro, and shaking their heads at the whole ridiculous spectacle. And you're left sitting on the beach at dusk, staring at the calm Pacific waves. The storm is past, the cannons are silent, and for the first time in years, the island breathes. You realize this war wasn't just stupid, savage, and absurd, it was also pointless. A colonial soap opera where the Samoans bore the cost and the foreigners wrote themselves heroic letters home. The war is over. The drums have stopped. You're no longer ducking cannon fire or dodging coconuts lobbed by confused Marines. The shoreline glows soft in the evening, the tide smoothing out scars left by anchors and wrecks. Smoke from burned villages is drifted away, replaced by the smell of roasting breadfruit. Close your eyes and listen. Just waves, just wind in the palms, just distant laughter from families who endured. No Germans, no Americans, no British, just Samoans reclaiming their nights. The harbor, once littered with wrecked ships, is calm, as if the ocean itself has erased the arrogance of men who thought they could own it. You breathe deeper, your body softens. The absurd slapstick battles, the treaties no one obeyed, the missionaries singing hymns louder than bullets, all of it fades now, distant echoes in the dark. You are safe. The war is over. There are no more rifles waiting in the jungle, no more storms brewing on the horizon, only stars scattered across the sky, brighter here than anywhere else on earth. You imagine lying back on woven mats, cool breeze on your skin, the hum of crickets steady like a lullaby. In this stillness, the ghosts of the war shouting consuls, dripping sailors, chiefs caught between duty and survival drift away into silence. You let them go. Now only calm remains. The waves will guard your sleep. The palms will murmur over you. And Samoa, bruised but unbowed, will dream on your behalf. Rest easy. No more cannons. No more chaos. Just peace, soft and steady.